Welcome to Microeconomics. In this third unit, I'll be talking about the basics of supply and demand. Now, supply and demand is so central to microeconomics and so central to this course that I'm actually going to have this overview unit that covers some of the definitions and the basic concepts, and we'll have a separate unit that goes into demand, and then a separate unit that goes into the basics of supply and what drives firms. So to dive in here and give you an outline of this unit, I'm going to start in this video with just giving you an intro, talking about the topics and the definitions. Then I'll do a little bit about the different ways to represent demand and thinking about quantity demanded. I'll then talk about the things that shift demand and determine it before I move into those same ideas for supply. I'll wrap up by thinking about how we put those two ideas together, how they work together in a system. This will lead us to that idea that you may have heard of equilibrium. But we'll also be talking about what happens when they don't match. Again, that's going to be a big idea that we're going to cover more later on in this course, but we're going to introduce that idea now, and then we'll conclude. So, starting with this first introductory portion, the things that I want you to take away from this is that the demand and supply ideas are things that summarize the behavior of buyer and sellers in the marketplace. These two ideas and curves and forces interact, and they give us and determine both an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity. Shifts in the demand and supply curves cause changes in these equilibrium prices and quantities, and the changes happen in very predictable ways. Now, backing up a little bit and thinking about society in general, because economics can speak a lot to societal questions, and these ideas of supply and demand help speak to the societal questions that I brought up earlier in this course of allocation. So every society has to answer in one way or another three basic questions in terms of producing goods and distributing them. The what goods are going to be produced, how much of each, how are we going to decide, and the second question is the how. What technology and resources are we going to use to produce these goods, how are we going to use them, and the final question that kind of circles back to this is the who's going to receive these production. How are the outputs going to be distributed? Are we going to do this based on need, based on income, based on power? What are the ways that we're going to do that? Now, these questions aren't kind of answered in a kind of philosophical roundtable. They're things that have been hammered out and answered over time in different ways, and have been set up in different structures over the years, and different countries take different approaches to answering these questions. Now, to introduce our first definition, I want to define what we're thinking about when we're saying a market or the market. It's just a place where goods and services are exchanged. Generally, we're thinking about this coming from sellers to buyers. Now, the market doesn't necessarily have to be physical. In our day and age, we see a lot of the exchange happening electronically, where we have markets that aren't necessarily a definitive place. However, there are three things that I would argue and say are necessary to properly define a market. Granted, we don't necessarily have to do this in every problem set we're working on. We skip this third one, which I'll get into in a second, a lot of the times. But we need to be very clear about what good we're talking about. Apples, cars, cell phones, etc. We also have to talk about the geographical range. Are we talking about apples sold in our particular town in the kind of Atlanta area? Are we talking about Georgia? What is the geographical range of our market? And even when we're defining the geographical range, we can think about it. Are we thinking about the geography for buyers, for sellers, or for both? And so there can be ambiguity there as well. The final thing that we need and will often leave out is we technically need a time frame. Are we talking about the number of apples that are sold in Atlanta in a day, in a month, or in a year? Now, the definition of markets, now this, it seems like a very simple thing. You say it and you're done. And that's actually not true. Market definition is not trivial. And this actually comes up in the law all the time. For instance, does a hot dog count as a sandwich? Right? Potentially there is a law that's giving a particular tax or benefit to sandwiches. Right? Do hot dogs count? And so this shows up legally. It's been in cases that have gone to the Supreme Court in terms of antitrust. Do you have a monopoly? Well, it depends on how you define the market. So market definition is important, and it's not something that is simply a 101, you know it, you're done. It's a kind of can be a very contested question. Now, the market is one method for allocating goods and services where buyers and sellers are coming together. Buyers we're often thinking about as individual consumers. They get some benefit or value from the good or services that is being exchanged, and in exchange what they are giving up is money in terms of the price to acquire that good or service. The sellers that we're talking about are often firms. They are bearing the cost to produce and make the good and are reaping the benefit of the price for the sale. What the market is doing is balancing two forces, and the market price, which you can see here, shows up for both the buyers and the sellers, is the force that is doing this balancing. Buyers are benefiting from having the good, they're getting that benefit, and the sellers are bearing the cost, and the price simply is the intermediary, the thing that is going between and communicating information from buyers to sellers. And this is going to be a point that I am going to be emphasizing throughout the course, is the role of prices in society and in markets. So markets, in bringing these buyers and sellers together and facilitating their exchange, are something that is used to allocate resources among households and firms. But I do want to emphasize, this is not the only way to allocate resources. This is not the only way that we as a country allocate resources. And I'll have you think in class and in other things about different ways and different examples where markets are not used. Generally, though, markets work very well when buying and selling is voluntary and when all the information necessary to do the exchange is known. So that is our intro. Next video, I'll be talking about demand and the way to represent the relationship between price and quantity demanded. Okay, you watch that one as well.